My name is Clara Whitmore. I build things that people call scalable until the word loses meaning. A consulting firm that turns chaotic departments into tidy profit centers. A small portfolio of investments that hum along like well-trained appliances. A life that runs on schedules and confirmations, and the comforting ping of money doing what money does best. Follow instructions. People at conferences use words like presence and gravitas when they talk about me, which is their way of saying I am not the sort of person who apologizes for taking up space. That's the short version. The long version is threaded through with 1,000 tiny refusals. I refused to stay in the town where everyone assumed ambition was a personality defect. I refused to marry the man who didn't want to look at a spreadsheet at 2 a.m. I refused to let other people define what I deserved. I learned how to be precise with my expectations the way a jeweler learns to be precise with a loupe. Everything matters, and you can't fake polish. My family, by contrast, practices a different religion. They've always worshipped the casual and the sufficient. The half apology, the borrowed favor, the emotional IOU. They are warm when it's convenient, sharp when it's cheaper than truth. Birthdays were a broadcasted performance. Big laughs, tiny gratitude. A playlist of old, forgiving songs. Ambition in our house was treated like a power outage, inconvenient, noisy, and something to be patched rather than fixed. So I learned to do the heavy lifting by myself, and then to feel peculiar about it, like someone who knows a secret language in a room where everyone else is pretending not to hear. Lily, my older sister, is the one who can make grand gestures that smell faintly of obligation. She has a smile that could have been designed by a publicist and a knack for making her wants sound like the kindest of suggestions. She's a teacher now, which suits her temper. She is patient, exacting in ways that earn her praise. We were close at the edges when we were children, the sort of sisters who knew how to trade snacks and secrets without a ledger. Somewhere in our 20s, the ledger showed up. Who's hosting whose holiday, whose partner gets to speak the loudest, whose successes get applauded and then repurposed as small talk. We stopped being close because I stopped shrinking. I chose to be loud where it mattered. They chose silence where it was easier. That distance hung between us like a favorite sweater you try to ignore in the back of the closet because it still fits, but you don't want to be seen wearing it. So when Lily texted me, a message quick and casual, no video call, no paragraph, just an ask that was both banal and heavy. I did what I normally don't do. I hesitated. Dinner this Saturday? Mom and Dad want to see you. Please? 3 little words that landed like a paper plane. I pictured my parents in their living room, the one with the threadbare armchair that remembers them better than they remember themselves. I pictured Lily's neat handwriting, the smell of pot roast, the soft television murmuring in the background. I pictured the relief on their faces if I agreed, as if my presence could be folded into their domestic economy and make everything balance. I said yes. Why did I say yes? There are a dozen plausible reasons and one honest one. Plausible. The calendar had an empty evening. I could roll the meeting over. It's Christmas season and people do this sort of thing. Honest. I wanted to see if reconciliation was possible without a contract. I wanted to see if adult proximity could repair something we let fray. I wanted to test whether I had grown or whether they had, whether the distance was a mutual drift or a one-way tide. I wanted to be brave in a way that didn't involve spreadsheets. I spent the week before the dinner rehearsing how not to be dramatic. I am very good at rehearsing. Keynote presentations turned into monologues in my apartment, rehearsed lines softened into conversation starters. I picked a dress that was neither armor nor apology, a simple navy sheath that was practical and flattering in a way that refused attention without denying it. I practiced letting small kindnesses be enough. I rehearsed saying nothing about the promotion that had just doubled my salary because I wanted to test their curiosity rather than their reflex to make everything about them. The night of, the city felt like a lit map. My cab threaded past storefronts that were alight with other people's rituals. Couples, laughter, the smell of frying. I remember the small domestic theatrics that precede any reunion, the purse set on the seat, the hand smoothing a skirt, the way one tunes their face to a frequency that says, I am ready for civility. The restaurant Lily chose was incongruously elegant for a family used to casseroles and chipped china. It was a place with low light and linen napkins where the staff moved like a precise, trained herd. I noticed the little things right away. The reservation under her name. The way Lily's smile was calibrated to the table. The way my mother's eyes softened at the sight of me and then flickered around the room, measuring acknowledgments like someone checking the weather. They asked about work with the kind of interest that looks generous until you recognize it as inventory. They asked about where I lived first in the tone people use when the subject is a curiosity cabinet. They complimented the dress in a way that folded itself into memory and would be used later, I suspected, as proof that I had been seen. I accepted the compliments like I accept a loan, warily. I wanted the night to be simple. I wanted to sip wine and laugh at old jokes, to feel the odd, quiet relief of being in the same room without negotiating for my worth. What I wanted, in the plainest sense, was to be less vigilant for an evening. That, in my family, is an extraordinary ask. As plates arrived and conversation flitted between banal updates and old grievances dressed as humor, a small, insistent voice in the back of my mind kept nudging. Pay attention. It's a useful voice. You need it when you make decisions that change your life. You need it when you recognize familiar patterns. Warmth followed by take, generosity that expects repayment in the currency of guilt. I told myself it was nostalgia making a liar out of me. Maybe they had changed. Maybe Lily had genuine regret. Maybe the years of being sidelined were closed chapters. Maybe adults can finally act like adults. That was the setup. A city that smelled like celebration, a table that looked like a truce, and me, 35 or so, in a navy dress wearing hope like a risky accessory. The stakes felt childish and enormous at once. If I stayed guarded, I would carry the weight of suspicion like an extra bag to my next meeting. If I let the guard down, I could be open to being wounded, or as I sometimes allowed myself to hope, finally understood. So I softened my shoulders. I allowed my laugh to come genuine for a minute. I let the night keep its promises. I had no idea the check would arrive with a different kind of promise. One written in ink that only pretended to be ink. I had not yet learned how little my weight mattered in the family accounting. That lesson would come later, like a bill slipped under a door. For now, there was only the clink of cutlery, my sister's practiced easy conversation, my father's little nods, and the quiet, ridiculous wish that maybe this was the beginning of something better. The meal unfurled like a rehearsal for a play I hadn't agreed to audition for. The menu read like a private economy. Oysters that glistened like promises. A bottle of wine that cost more than my first car. A chef's tasting that arrived in reverent pieces. Lily's laugh sounded rehearsed in a new register. Warmer, louder, practiced to fill the space where real curiosity should have been. My parents, Margaret and Robert, sat as if they were watching a program that required applause at all the right beats. They kept stealing looks at me, not with the soft satisfaction of parents seeing a child thrive, but with a ledger's eye. Calculating, noting. At first, I cataloged the evening as one of those small, awkward family efforts. They ordered without consulting me. An extra appetizer here, the second bottle of wine there. It was all subtle. A practiced choreography of escalation designed so that by the time the bill landed, it would look like arithmetic rather than aggression. When the waiter suggested several expensive dishes, Lily beamed and said, "We're celebrating Clara tonight. She's doing so well, aren't you?" As if success were a social cue that authorized consumption. There were jokes, the kind that live in families made of old resentments. "You'd probably do a spreadsheet of this, Clara," Dad said, clapping his hand on my knee like it was a friendly jab. "Tell us which line item we should be embarrassed about." Their laughter had an edge that tried very hard to be tender and landed somewhere between pity and possession. My mother, who once called my ambitions too much in a moment that looked for all the world like concern, now announced loudly that she was proud of me in a way that felt rehearsed and therefore empty. Praise that arrives as performance is its own kind of pressure. I could feel the old scripts queuing up. If you succeed, you pay. If you have, you share. If you leave, you owe a demonstration of loyalty. Those rules had been memorized by my family like the 10 Commandments. When I used to be younger and smaller, I'd fold in and comply because that's what family looked like in our house, elastic and forgiving. But years of being sidelined had a way of hardening you. It's not that I kept score, it's that their economy of affection always required a withdrawal I was expected to authorize. You know, we always split things, right? Lily said at one point, but her hand never reached for the check. She was watching me the way a director watches an actor finish a scene. The waiter, who had been given a script I hadn't read, floated by with a smile that was used to families who socialize their expenses onto one person. My skin prickled. The tiny voice in the back of my head, the same one that keeps me from signing poorly worded contracts, whispered, "Pay attention." As the meal progressed, the commentary shifted from light banter to a slow, serrated kind of needlework. Remarks landed like small pebbles at first, then a pebble barrage. "It must be nice to have time for conferences," said Aunt June, who'd once told me I should stop being so needy about my career and focus on my real life. "You've always been lucky," offered Uncle Mark, as if luck alone stitched together a decade of late nights and hard choices. They talked about my promotions as if I were an artifact in a family museum, admired from a distance, then pawned off as story material at cocktail hours. Each comment pressed on old bruises. I remembered nights I paid for my own flights to interviews they told me were too ambitious. The semester I took out loans and heard my mother tell a neighbor I was being dramatic. I remembered being the one who drove my siblings to the dentist, who brought casseroles when someone was sick, who was thanked with a shrug until adulthood made my absence noticeable, only when I was convenient to take from. Memory is a slow tide. It rises when you least expect it, and suddenly you're wading through cold water, wondering how it got so deep. I tried to recalibrate the room with civility. I asked about Lily's teaching, asked Dad how his knee was, smiled when my mother announced she had redecorated. Being the architect of my own boundaries doesn't mean I live in a hermetically sealed vault. I wanted to be present. I wanted to be generous in a way that was real, not performative. But generosity has to be chosen. It can't be coerced with a menu and a side of guilt. The server set down desserts we hadn't ordered and said cheerfully, "Compliments from the table." Lily thanked him with a nod, I've seen used more than once to close a discussion. Compliments, it turned out, were another way to normalize the indulgence. The tax and tip would be a neat, obscuring cloak on top of the arithmetic. The same way someone tucks a receipt into a book, they were tucking expectations into me. When the check arrived, it arrived as if it were a prop the family had rehearsed to perfection. It was folded, leather-bound, and, because this is the theater of family manipulation, addressed to me. Not even a casual, "we can split," or a joking, "your treat." Just my name printed on the cover, like an invoice from fate. I felt the table tilt slightly. Lily bit the corner of her napkin and smiled the tidy smile of someone who has arranged a surprise and is enjoying the reveal. My father tapped a finger against his glass as if this were an amusing trick. "Oh, come on, Clara, you can handle this. We all knew you'd be the one." Handle this? The phrase landed wrong. The numbers inside were worse. $2,200 for a single family dinner. It wasn't the money. I could have paid easily. It was the principle and the weight of the humiliation baked into, "Of course you will." The amount was a punctuation mark, a declaration that my success was communal property, and that my presence at the table validated the assumption that I would finance everyone else's conviviality. I could feel the people at surrounding tables glance over the rim of their wines, smelling a quiet spectacle. I remember my hand tightening around the menu until the paper creased. The room narrowed. Years of small heats, the subtle things that told me I was inconvenient, simmered into a feeling like a fist in my chest. Lily leaned forward, her voice honeyed. "We thought this would be a nice gesture. You always do so much for yourself. Tonight we wanted to include you." Include me? The verb sounded like camouflage. I had spent my life proving I could build things, and here they were building a theater to make me pay for the props. For a moment, the old reflex, the one that says keep the peace, be reasonable, don't cause a scene, vied with the newer one that had gotten me promotions and clients and flights on my own dime. Do not be taken for granted. The dinner had been orchestrated. The bill was the reveal. I felt the animal part of me, the part that remembers shelter being conditional, rise. The polite part of me took inventory. If this is how they see me, what else will they expect? Will my next success come with a suggested donation chart? Would they assume my apartment was a resource and my time a currency to be spent? Words hovered at the rim of my mouth. I thought of every instance where my generosity had been met with a shrug, every small kindness repaid with entitlement. I thought of the last time I'd asked for help and been told I was dramatic for expecting it. I thought of the ledger they kept but wouldn't show me. I felt, suddenly, that the only honest response would be more than a refusal to pay a bill. It would have to communicate that there are consequences to treating a person like a walking ATM. But in that charged, slow second, before I decided what kind of woman I would be in front of them, the waiter cleared his throat and looked to me, waiting for payment the way a dog waits for a table scrap. Lily's smile had that brittle edge that adults develop when they're waiting for someone to step into their script. The room leaned forward. The bill sat between us like a loaded question. When the bill landed on the table like a They called first, then they texted. Then, in that modern choreography of hurt and accusation, they tried the long game. Guilt by proxy, silent treatment, dramatic appeals to family. Lily left a voicemail, the kind you hear after someone rehearses regret in a bathroom mirror. Precise, practiced, but missing the tremor that tells you it was real. My mother sent a string of messages that alternated between apology and explanation, as if the two were interchangeable. Robert called twice. The second time, his voice was smaller, the part of him that once taught me to ride a bike, showing up in the pauses. Outside of those, the reactions spread like gossip through a small storm. A cousin I'd always liked sent a private message that said, in effect, "Thank you," which felt like someone opening a window on a hot day. An aunt who had once been my fiercest critic posted a subtweet about family values, and I watched it with the same detached curiosity I reserve for shareholder reports. There were friends on both sides. Some surprised, some delighted, some worried I'd burned bridges. The family group chat, our quaint archive of memes and passive-aggressive holiday plans, filled with a flurry of messages I mostly ignored. I let a few through and blocked the rest. Boundaries are porous when you're testing them, but this one didn't need to be porous. There were attempts to make me the villain, as always happens when someone refuses to play the old game. They called me cold, dramatic, ungrateful. They said I had humiliated them in public. I read the accusations like a catalog of the versions of myself they preferred. Small, apologetic, profitable in ways that made them comfortable. It would have been easy to answer with fury, to narrate every slight, to hand them a slideshow of receipts. Instead, I replied with facts and a refusal dressed in civility. I forwarded the scan-signed agreement to the family email thread with a short note, "Receipt attached. Terms accepted." No flourish, no sermon. The simplicity of the act did more work than a speech. Some of them gasped and then gaslit. Some actually read the document. A few people, the ones who'd quietly felt the old power plays and lacked the language to name them, sent messages that were small and honest. "I'm sorry I didn't see. I didn't understand." Those messages mattered in a way nothing else could. They were the equivalent of someone finally putting a name to a recurring pain. Lily texted the night after, 4 paragraphs that oscillated between apology and explanation. She signed off with a question. Could we talk? I answered in the shortest, most generous way I could manage. Yes, but not tonight. She came by a week later with coffee and a tremor in her hands. We spoke, and for the first time in years, our conversation held both of us accountable without collapsing into territorial blame. She asked why I hadn't just told them no. I told her I had, in a way that would last, and she cried. I did not feel triumphant then. I felt tired and strangely grateful. There was mourning in that room for what our relationship had been, and a cautious curiosity for what it might become. The more dramatic fallout came from the performance of people trying to repair public image. Dinner invites dried up for a while. Not because I was suddenly ostracized, but because the social economy had shifted and they had to decide whether to respect my terms or keep assuming them. Some relatives staged small reconciliations that felt like well-polished apologies. Others doubled down, retreating into the comforting narrative that I was making waves for attention. It was all noise. The important thing was less about them and more about what I had allowed myself to keep. There was a whisper of loneliness after the storm. Even justified severance has a price. I lost some of the easy domesticity that had been mine by being the accommodating sibling, and with it the small rituals that once felt like belonging. That absence stung like a late winter wind, but the sting faded into a cleaner feeling. A spare shelf where a dozen unnecessary obligations used to live. I slept better. I stopped thinking about whether I deserved my success and started thinking about what I wanted to do with it. I redirected a portion of the money, enough to be tangible, not merely symbolic, to a local shelter and sent each family member the receipt with a note. This is where the money went when you chose spectacle over reconciliation. It was an act that felt like closing a loop rather than burning bridges. The shelter sent a thank you that read like the only kind of applause that matters. Clear, practical, with names attached to it. At work, nothing blew up. Clients respected the composure I returned to with the quiet of someone who had reclaimed a piece of herself. Colleagues who knew me saw it and nodded as if I had simply done what needed doing. There was, unexpectedly, a professional halo to setting a boundary. People respected a person who would not be taken for granted. Months later, invitations resumed in forms that were honest rather than performative. Brunch with the cousin who'd confessed privately, a holiday message from an aunt with a short, genuine note. Lily and I traded tickets to a play we both wanted to see, and we went together, two adults who knew the score and decided to play a different game. We did not rebuild everything overnight. Rebuilding takes time, like a house where you insist on permits and proper foundations. We did the work that keeps things good instead of pretending they are fine. Most importantly, I learned a practical lesson that felt moral as well as strategic. Generosity is not a ledger one keeps for other people to exploit. It is, instead, a practice you choose and a gift you give on terms you set. I still give. I still help. I still show up, but not as a resource to be plundered. The clarity of that distinction has made every subsequent kindness less anxious and more joyful. Sometimes I think about the moment I left the restaurant, the way the night air felt like fresh pages after a chapter you didn't like. There was no triumphant mic drop, no cinematic speech. The revenge, if you can call it that, was small and human. An invoice typed in a font they recognized, a signature that made them pause, and the insistence that I would not pay for performances disguised as love. Years compress memory like a good editor. When I look back, the image that stays with me is not the slam check or the furious texts. It is a quiet morning, months later, when Lily sent a photo of our niece asleep, hair mussed, thumb in mouth, and a short message, "Thank you," for everything. I replied with a photo of my own, a stack of contracts, a pot of coffee, the city awake outside my window, and wrote, "I'll always be here, on my terms." That was the real ending. Not exile, not vengeance, but a settled contract with myself. The family we had been might not return, and that was a grief worth grieving. The family we might become was an option built on honest terms, mutual respect, and fewer hidden invoices. I could live with that. I could build with that. I could be generous and still be whole.